So people think that feminism and romance are in conflict, but is that true? People think it's true, so it's vital to find out if it is true. Because if it is, then women will actually be forced to choose between love and liberty. That is, between respect, the respect that gender equality gives them, and being loved by men. That's a hideous choice no one should have to make. Are feminists more likely to experience conflict in relationships than non-feminist traditional women? Are men paired with feminist women more likely to suffer, say, in the bedroom? So Julie Phelan and I conducted a lab survey using Rutgers undergrads and an online survey with older adults in order to find out if these beliefs are true. Women and men reported their feminist identity and attitudes, which correlated so well we combined them to form one measure of own feminism, participants' own feminism. And they reported their partner's feminist identity and attitudes, and that too was highly correlated, so that was combined to form one index of their partner's feminism. The relationship variables were well-established measures of relationship quality, equality within the relationship, stability, are you going to stay or stray, and sexual satisfaction, which we only asked about in study 2 using the older sample because I'd known from other research I'd conducted that about 50% of Rutgers undergraduates are virgins. So relationship health measures. For relationship quality, we asked how often do you feel relaxed with your partner? You and your partner laugh together, confide your deepest feelings to your mate. How often do you and your mate share similar interests? How often do you quarrel, and how often does your partner get on your nerves? Relationship equality, how often do you and your partner disagree about gender equality, disagree about your role in the relationship, or agree about women's rights? And some of these items were reverse scored and then averaged so that in each case a high score is greater relationship quality and more equality within the relationship. For relationship stability, we asked how often have you considered terminating your relationship? Do you think about finding another partner? Do you think that things between you and your partner are going well? How often do you think your romantic relationship has a good future? And sexual satisfaction consisted of items like my relationship is sexually satisfying. The sexual side of my relationship could use improvement. How often have you considered having a sexual relationship with someone other than your partner? And again, after reverse scoring, we averaged these items so that a high score meant greater relationship stability and more sexual satisfaction. We also measured people's sexual orientation. Are you heterosexual or something else? And whether or not they were currently in a relationship. And that's because for our critical analyses, we need only heterosexuals that are currently in a relationship. That's how we're going to find out whether feminism and romance are oil and water or more like champagne and strawberries. So you can pause the slide here and study the sample characteristics. I'll just point out that the biggest difference are, of course, age, with adults being older than our Rutgers undergraduate sample, and of course the relationship length is considerably longer as well. When we compared the two samples, we found that, as is always the case, women reported more feminism than men in both samples, so that we never see anything but a sex difference when people are asked to report their feminist identity and their attitudes towards feminists. And then we also found that older women reported that their male partners were less likely to be feminists than younger women did. So that's a hopeful sign that the younger generation has more gender egalitarianism in their love lives, at least based on the Rutgers sample. There are no sample differences in the relationship health variables, which were, again, quality, equality, stability, and sexual satisfaction. So the question is, are female feminists or men who are involved with them more likely to have troubled relationships? And if that's true, then for women, we would expect negative correlations between their own feminism and our four relationship health variables. And for men, we would expect negative relationships between their female partner's feminism and the four relationship health variables. So what did we find? The results were the same for both samples, so I'll just present the adult survey findings because only they completed the sexual satisfaction index. And let's start with own feminism. Does it predict having a poor relationship, especially for women? Turns out, nope, being a feminist has absolutely nothing to do with happy unions. So these are the slide that presents the correlations between own feminism and relationship quality, equality, stability, and sexual satisfaction for women. And you can see that these correlations are all about as close to zero as you can get. And for men, and you can see that none of them are significant because they don't have the little asterisks, right? So functionally, we can just say, nope, these correlations are zero, statistically speaking. Nothing, it doesn't hurt them, it doesn't help them, whether or not you are a feminist. So now we look at partners feminism. Do men who have feminist partners suffer from troubled relationships? Nope. In fact, they benefit from having feminist partners on two dimensions. You'll see that it's stability, they're more likely to stay in the relationship, and sexual satisfaction. And women benefit from having male feminist partners on every single relationship health dimension. So you can see all the correlations are in bright yellow and starred for women, positive, and the correlations for men are positive and starred for sexual satisfaction and relationship stability. Are you surprised? Men paired with feminist partners reported greater relationship stability and sexual satisfaction, which goes against popular beliefs, right? Feminism does not lead to divorce or disrupt men's pleasure in the bedroom. In fact, feminism benefits romantic relationships. There was no evidence that women's feminism creates conflict, and some evidence that it benefits men to be in relationships with them. There was consistent across the board evidence that male feminist partners are healthy for women's relationships. And I'll just say one thing else about that, which I didn't show on the slide, but one way that being a feminist indirectly helps women's relationships is because women's own feminism was highly correlated with their partner's feminism. So similarity attraction principle would suggest that if you are a feminist, then you're going to look for a male partner who's a gender egalitarian, right? He might not call himself a feminist, but if he views you as his equal and he agrees with you on women's rights, then you have a feminist partner. And women who are themselves feminists are more likely to be involved with men like that. And then that helps their relationships, and it helps the man's relationships as well. So another thing we can ask with these data are whether those ugly man-hating lesbian stereotypes, if they're accurate. And what we did to test this is we combined all our two samples, and we, of course, released the brakes on whether or not people were in a relationship and on their sexual orientation, and that gave us 784 women. So now we're going to test whether those negative feminist stereotypes have a kernel of truth. To do so, we asked women to report their sexual orientation, as you already know, and whether or not they were in a relationship, as you already know, but also we asked them to report their sex appeal using these items. People often tell me I'm attractive. People compliment me on my looks. I consider myself to be attractive. It's not difficult for me to get a date. I'm frequently head on for sex, and I seem to be very popular with the opposite sex. So what did we find? We found that women who are high on feminist identity are more likely to be in a relationship. So there goes that sort of single and lonely spinster type stereotype that people have of feminists. And then it has absolutely nothing to do with whether they're straight or a lesbian, and it has nothing to do with their sex appeal. So for women, feminism was unrelated to their sexuality and sex appeal and positively linked to being in a relationship. So these common beliefs that feminists are likely to be lesbians, unappealing to men, or single and lonely were overthrown. So media attention was unbelievable. I just was swamped with the media's interest in these findings. There were many, many newspaper articles and postings on the internet. I stopped counting at 6 different languages that the study was translated into. There's probably more than that. And the study was even featured on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. So you probably have no idea how amazing this is, but I will tell you this. If you are a psychologist and you get any media attention to your findings at all, they're likely to be buried in the lifestyle section. They never show up on the front page of a prestigious newspaper like the Chicago Tribune. But there it was. Headline, study, feminists are better mates. Supporters of equality for women also have stronger relationships, new research says, by Judy Perez. Take a feminist out to dinner. That's the advice of a social psychologist who concludes in a new study that feminists make better partners and have stronger romantic relationships. Laurie Rudman of Rutgers University had found in earlier research that negative stereotypes of feminists, that they're unattractive, man-hating lesbians in a nutshell, cause young adults to distance themselves from the F word and tone down their demands for equality. A majority of college-age respondents agreed with such statements as, most men would probably not want to date a feminist, and romance depends in part on men being allowed to be in charge. This was alarming to Rudman, who's old enough to remember the heyday of the women's rights movement in the 1970s. Continued efforts to achieve gender equality could be seriously hurt, she reasoned, if women and men think it comes at the expense of love. So, with the help of graduate student Julie Phelan, she set about trying to determine if there was any truth to the notion that feminists are more likely than traditional women to have crummy relationships. And she goes on to give you the results as well as talk about how feminist stereotypes are not accurate. Other headlines from media attention were carnal knowledge, sex with the feminist is great, survey finds, and eat your heart out, Rush Limbaugh. Feminists are sexy. He's the one who coined the term feminazis, and he's always saying feminists are ugly, man-hating lesbians. So eat your heart out, Rush. Feminists do it better. And the fact that negative feminist stereotypes were either contradicted or not supported was newsworthy. And then I don't even know if it's still on, but there was a show called Mansers at that time. It's a show that it was a television show that purports to help men by giving them answers, right? So Lee Jussum, who's my colleague in the social psych area, he told me that he was channel surfing when he came upon this question and answer. Men, if you want to get laid, who should you ask out on a date? Answer A, a female bartender, B, a vegetarian hippie, or C, a feminist. So you know the answer. But I bet a lot of men in their audience got it wrong, so they had to tell them, answer, bang, a feminist. A study by Rutgers social scientists Laurie Rudman and Julie Phelan shows that men who date feminists are more sexually satisfied than other men. The reason our findings were newsworthy stems from diehard beliefs about feminists as man-hating lesbians. I mean, it just contradicted so many people's worldview that they instantly thought, wow, this is going to get people's attention. But I wasn't totally shocked, but I want you now to notice the similarity. Popular beliefs stigmatize feminists, particularly along sexual lines. You're too ugly to get a man, you hate men, and P.S., you're probably gay. But look at the similarity. Women who challenge male dominance by becoming successful leaders on the world stage, or who have any kind of power at all, are punished in the same way. right? They get turned into monsters, depriving them of their femininity, or we ridicule them sexually, as I've talked about before. So notice that whether prominent women are liberals or conservatives, right? Margaret Thatcher is a conservative, Sarah Palin, conservative, Hillary Clinton, liberal, Kamala Harris, liberal. The list goes on and on. They're ridiculed on sexual dimensions. So that tells us that feminism isn't the real problem. It's not the F word that's the problem. The real problem is the P word, such that female plus power equals hideous. Now, if you were coming up with a recipe for how to suppress women in order to keep patriarchy going along, humming along, what would you do? I can't think of a better strategy than to use love, right? If you make women think they have to choose between liberty and love, many will vote for love. By teaching women that they were made to devote their time and energies to loving their family, you hobble their will to shape the world to be more open to feminine power. And that's how patriarchy marches on. Back in 1970, Firestone wrote a book called The Dialectic of Sex, The Case for a Feminist Revolution. And this quote has kind of, been tattooed on the inside of my eyelids for decades now. And I revisit it occasionally because it's provocative. And it's inspired some of the research that I've done with respect to feminism and love. And also romantic fantasies, which we'll talk about later on. Okay, so what she said, the panic felt that any threat to love is a good clue to its political significance. Women in love are underpinnings. Threaten them, and you threaten the very structures of culture. So what I think she means is that, harks back to that question I keep asking you, why are women expected to do the lion's share of the loving? And I think what she's saying is because if women were taught that they have much more to offer the world than love, the foundations of patriarchy would crumble. Questioning a system in which women and love are underpinnings is politically dangerous, right? More women would agitate for equality, more women would be feminists, instead of banking on men to take care of them. But it turns out that feminism is good for love, so nobody really has to make a choice between it and gender equality. So I hope now you can see why I was keen to have you interview at least one man and one woman about what the F word means to them and to you. And also to find out whether myths that feminism troubles our love lives hinders people's ability to be full-throated feminist cheerleaders. It shouldn't. People hold these beliefs, but they're not true. And I guess I'm keen to know whether people you interview are suffering under those delusions. Okay? So I'll be excited to see what you find out.